Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Welcome. Hey, LeaderCast is this Friday, and if you've been thinking, well, I ought to go, but I haven't signed up yet, or maybe, or I don't know, let me just help you. You ought to go. You're going to love it if you come. It's going to be a high inspiration, high impact day. We have community leaders coming, business leaders coming, students coming. We're going to have a panel discussion at lunch with the mayor and the vice mayor and a delegate and some business leaders talking about the future of our community and what it's going to take to lead our community forward. And so we're really excited about that. But it's just going to be a really, really fun day that will help you. If you've set a brave heading, if you found your brave and you know where you need to go, part of that is leading yourself, and that's the whole theme of the day. So it will be a worthy investment of your time. If you can make it, come. And again, it's just $50 for Vineyard folks, and you can use the code in your program to register and be here. It's not too late. This Friday. Also, the day before, as Mike mentioned, the National Day of Prayer will be happening. We're a sponsor of the National Day of Prayer, and really we just want to encourage you, be praying for our nation, our state, our community, our region, and if you can come out at 6:30 on Thursday night to the Pine Room, do that as well. So that's it. That's all for the commercials. You guys ready for Brave? All right. Hey, if you're new with us, we're in the fourth week of a 6-week sermon series called Brave. So you're kind of coming in the middle of the movie, but that's okay. I'll catch you up. Before I do, though, let me encourage you. This is one of those series that would be worth your time to go back online at vineyardwheeling.com and watch the sermons, because this is a journey that we're kind of on together, and it's not too late for you to get in on it. And the whole premise behind this series is that for most of us have something in our life we know we need to do. We have, whether it's I need to get in shape, or I got this idea, but I've never acted on it because it's kind of scary, or maybe you have a business in you that you're supposed to start, or a career change you're supposed to do, or maybe you're supposed to ask her to marry you, or I don't know what it is for you. But here's what I know. The thing that holds us back time after time after time is fear. Like, we are afraid, what will happen if? Well, I don't know about that. Well, that could be hard. And we get afraid, and then our fear holds us back. And when we're held back, we miss the breakthrough that God has for us because we're hanging out on the lazy boy instead of walking out on the water. And that's what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. The first week, I asked everybody, identify what that thing is for you. And pray, talk to God, listen, and ask Him to show you. For a lot of us, you know what it is before I even started talking. But whatever it is, write it down so that you have your brave heading. You have that direction, because you're going to need that for the journey, because there will be storms and all of that. So that's catching you up. So if you're new with us this week, you're caught up. And we're talking about some of the things that happen once you set out on that brave journey and why it's worth it anyway. All right? So this week we're going to be in Matthew chapter 14. We were in Matthew chapter 14 2 weeks ago. We're coming back around. We're actually going to be earlier in the chapter. And we're looking at a true story, something that happened with Jesus. And so I want to give you a little background on it. Jesus has been, for the last 2 years, has been traveling around the region of Galilee, preaching and teaching, healing people, performing miracles. Everybody wants to be around Jesus. The longer he goes, the bigger the crowds get. And so at this point, he can't go anywhere. He can't even go into towns without having just throngs of people around him. And so he gets word one day that his cousin and friend, guy you might have heard of named John the Baptist, was executed. He had been arrested. He was in jail, and he was executed. And Jesus turns to his disciples and says, we need to pull away from the crowds. I need to go somewhere quiet and just, process this. Now, I love, if that was all that we were going to talk about today, I love that, because it shows the humanity of Jesus. Here is probably the person who, more than anybody else who's ever lived in light of eternity. And even he wanted to pull away when he found out his cousin was executed, and mourn. Sometimes we think, or maybe we're told that, well, you shouldn't be sad if you're a Christian, or you shouldn't have to deal or emotionally struggle with these things if you're a Christian. Well, Jesus did. And I think he's a pretty good model. He pulled away and he mourned for his, or wanted to mourn for his cousin. He eventually does. But like I said, the crowds are everywhere. So he puts his disciples in a boat and says, let's go off to a solitary place, just a remote place where we can just be alone and just kind of have some downtime. And so they head off, but the crowd sees him go. And so they follow along on land. So when they get to where they're going, they get out of the boat, there's about 10 to 20,000 people there waiting for him. And he spends the day, rather than sending them away or getting back in the boat and trying to find another place, he spends the day caring for these people. He spends the day teaching and healing and doing what he does. And it says in Matthew 14:15, as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Now, I thought the Villages was in southern Florida, but it's America's friendliest hometown. I didn't know that it was, anyway, just kidding. All right, so now I've got that tune in my head. The village. Anyway, so Jesus, you're not going to be able to pay attention either. I don't know that I can keep preaching. All right, so he sends, the disciples come to Jesus and say, we got a problem on our hands, right? We've got a group of people, there's no restaurants around here, and they're going to be getting hungry, and not just hungry, but hangry, 20,000 hangry people in a remote place. It's a problem, Jesus. So they go to Jesus and they say, Jesus, we want you to fix the problem. Here's how you need to fix the problem. Send these people away so that they can go buy dinner, in the surrounding areas. And Jesus replies, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. Now, I think this is fascinating because Jesus knows, as they knew, they don't have enough food to feed these people. They didn't even, as we'll learn, they didn't even have enough food to feed themselves. How on earth are they going to feed 10 to 20,000 people? But I love this about this account, and that's this. Jesus gives them something to do. Sometimes we'll come to God in prayer and we'll say, oh God, here's the problem. And if you'll just fix it, just sprinkle some Jesus dust on it and it will all be poof. It's all better, just the way I told you to. But that's not how Jesus plays. Jesus so often will come back and say, oh, I'm here and we're going to deal with this, but you do something. And he gives them something to do. He gives them an impossible something to do. You give them something to eat. So often with us, it's the same way. And I think the disciples had, they had a choice. They could have said, well, this is impossible. We're just going to sit down and kind of go on strike. We'll sit down and wait for you to do something, Jesus. And I think a lot of times that's what we do. We'll sit down. So many times Christians will go on strike. We're like, God, this is what you should do, and I'm praying that you do it, and I'm just going to sit here and pray until you fix this. And oftentimes what he does, not always, sometimes he'll say, sit and pray and wait, but oftentimes what he does is he'll say, and when he does that, you need to do that. You need to sit and pray and wait. But more often than not, he'll say, you fix it. You do something. And you won't have the resources to do it. And you'll look at it and go, that's an impossible situation, but that's where the good stuff happens. That's where you begin to realize that it wasn't me in the first place, it was him. And they decide that as well. I believe Jesus wants his followers to have a propensity towards action. I think it's why he promoted and loved Peter so much. He talked about this 2 weeks ago. The Apostle Peter was in constant motion. He was the first one to walk out on the water, the only one to walk out on the water. He was the first one to open his mouth. He had this propensity towards action. And I think Jesus would a lot of times look into our lives and go, oh, do something, even if it's the wrong thing. Because you can't steer a parked car, right? It's got to be in motion to be able to steer it. And God can't steer a life that is just parked. He wants us in motion, and he can get us to where he needs us to be. And as we talked about in previous weeks, it's okay to make mistakes along the way. God can handle our mistakes. But he can't do much with us being on strike. So don't go on strike. Well, they start asking around. So that's the other option. They do something. They don't know that this is going to help, but we're going to do it. So they do something. And they start asking around, and then they come back and they go, we have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish out of 20,000 people. Somebody you would have thought would have planned a little bit better than just, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Basically, they have a value meal from Long John Silver. They got 5 hush puppies, 2 pieces of fish. Can I just say for a second, I love Long John Silver, and I am very disappointed that they tore down Long John Silver and Wheelie. Is anybody with me on that? Yeah, all right. There are other people who like to get their oil changed at Long John Silver. And so, Taco Bell does not even compare. And you know why they closed it down? They said there were rats. I don't care. I don't care. I mean, deep fried anything is delicious, Anyway, very upset. I was traveling this weekend. I was on my way down to Cincinnati, and I went down via Marietta, and there was a Long John Silver, and I stopped and got a meal and got my oil changed. I'm feeling good. All right, so they bring Jesus this value meal, right? And that's all they got. One meal, one dinner, 10 to 20,000 people. What are we going to do with that? Now, let me ask you this question. Can God do miracles? Say yes. Does he do miracles? Say yes. Yes, absolutely. But he often wants us to engage first. He asks the disciples to do something, not just sit there. Tells them to figure it out. God directs moving feet, and he breaks through in the midst of obedience. Now, if God tells you to sit there and pray, sit there and pray. But I'm telling you, more often than not, God says, when you see a problem in your life, or you see a problem in our world, and it breaks your heart, you're like, God, fix this, fix this, fix this. And he may be saying, if you'll stop long enough to listen, you do something. You do something, and you just got your brave direction. You got your brave heading. And you probably don't have what it takes to make it happen. But he does. And that's kind of the point. Because if you just do it on what you have, you're not going to make that much of a difference. But if you do it in his power, when you realize you don't have what it takes, look out. Big things are about to happen. Now, some of us would say, but what about prayer? Well, prayer's vital. Prayer's important. Absolutely, we're going to see Jesus pull away and spend some time in prayer in just a moment as part of this narrative. He does that. But then in the next scene, he's out walking on the water, right? He doesn't just stay there. And the disciples, I guarantee they were praying as they were looking around. The gentleman who led the Vineyard movement early on, his name was John Wimber, is famous for saying one of the most powerful prayers you can pray and profound prayers you can pray is, oh God, oh God, oh God. Like, this is bigger than me. I'm in over my head. I don't have what it takes. God, you got to come through. Oh God, oh God. And I'm guessing these guys were praying that as they're going around asking, do you have any food? Do you have any food? Oh God, nobody has food. And they're praying as they go. It's a powerful and profound prayer of dependence upon God. Now, 2 unbiblical approaches that I see today when God says, you do something about it. Here's your brave heading, you do something about it. One is we sit down and we wait. I'm not going to do something about it. God, I don't have what it takes. I'm just going to sit here and pray until you do something about it. The other unbiblical approach is this, and that is we jump in and we get ahead of God and we try and fix it with our own resources. And I'm telling you, if it's a God-sized project and he's got you working on it, you don't have the resources to do it on your own. You have to have a dependence on him, his presence, and his power to get through. And so you don't want to be in either one of those extremes. See, the Jesus way is to listen to what he says and do it. Start moving and look for the miracle in the moving and pray as you go that powerful prayer of dependence. Oh God, oh God, oh God, you got to do this, Lord. So they say, we have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Bring them here to me, he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and he broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people, and they all ate till they were satisfied. Now, this is a fairly profound statement. Culturally, you have to understand, we live in an age with refrigeration and plenty of food. In fact, the current estimate is Americans throw away 40% of our food. Like we scrape 40% of our food into the trash. We eat until we're full every time we sit down and eat. They did not. They did not have refrigeration. They did not have ready supplies of food. They would go to feasts and they would eat until they were filled. But when they talked about the wedding feast of the Lamb, and when we get to heaven, we're going to eat until we're full all the time. And that was a big deal to them. To us, it's kind of like, well, we do that every meal, right? That was a big deal. There was plenty of food. So much that they all ate until they were satisfied. And not just then, the disciples picked up 12 baskets fulls of broken pieces that were left over. See, when we rely on Jesus' power in the midst of our lack of resources, what happens is not that we get just enough to get it done, but God comes through with abundance. Right? We're like, do I have enough? And he doesn't work that way. It says the number of those who ate was about 5,000 men besides women and children. And again, if we do the math, 5,000 men plus their families is about 10 to 20,000 people. So on this brave adventure, my hope is that you've set a heading, that there's a direction you're moving in. You've got your thing. And if you haven't set that direction, that you would take a little bit of time. It's not too late. We're at the halfway point of this series. You can jump in and set that heading and head off in that direction. Ask God to talk to you. But you're going to need everything you can bring to the endeavor. You're going to need all your mental capacities. You're going to need a lot of hard work. You're going to need your friends along the way. You're going to need your financial resources to pull it off, whatever it is, my guess is. And even with all of those things, chances are you'll get into the middle of it and you'll realize, I don't have what it takes. I don't have enough to make this happen. And then you have two choices. You can quit and go, oh, it's too overwhelming. Or you can bring what you have to Jesus. That's what the disciples did. They show up with the value meal and they're like, Jesus, this is what we got. And he takes it and does the miracle, right? We go to God and say, I don't have everything I need to do this, but I trust you. And I'm going to bravely take the next step. And I'm going to bravely move forward. And I'm going to bravely obey what you've told me to do. And guys, that's where the miracles happen. The miracles are past the point of resistance, past the point of realizing it's impossible, past the point, and you keep going. It's kind of like walking on water, right? When Jesus called Peter out onto the water, it's like, well, that's impossible. Take a step. Take a step. When back in 2000, I had been on staff here for about 10 years, and I was at a place where I was tired and frustrated and dealing with some just personal, internal stuff, and I was ready to be done doing ministry. And I was talking to a friend of mine in California who I'd become close friends with, and we were talking that through and processing that. And after about a month or two, I had come to the conclusion that the right thing for me to do was to turn in my resignation and be done. And so I told him, and he said, you know what, based on our conversations and prayer and everything, I think that's probably the right thing for you to do. He said, but before you do, I am involved with a ministry to pastors and their wives. And he goes, on my dime, I want to fly you and your wife out here to spend a weekend with some of our folks who minister to pastors. And I said, but I'm not going to be a pastor. I hate, give it to somebody who wants to, don't spend the resources. I'm stepping out of I'm stepping out of that. And he's like, that's okay. He goes, we just want to bless you. You've put in 10 years and want to, bless you and make sure you're okay. And I'm like, all right, a free trip to Palm Springs, I'm in. I like free vacations. So anyway, we went out and spent a couple days, and part of it was just taking time and listening to what God would say to us. And so one particular day, they gave us some scriptures to read and said, just sit quietly for about 3 hours. Well, I have ADD, so sitting quietly for 3 hours is like, I have to walk. Quietly sitting for 3 hours is me walking. So I ended up climbing this mountain. And I got to the top of this mountain, and as I crested the top of the mountain, there was another mountain in the distance. And I realized I wasn't on a mountain at all. I was on a foothill. It looked like a mountain when you're at the bottom of it. When you get to the top, there's a 12,000-foot snow-covered mountain off in the distance, and I'm like, that's a mountain. right? And so I turned back around to the direction that I came from and was looking down on the golf courses and all that in Palm Springs, and I sat down on this rock, and I said, God, I am listening. Would you just, if you have anything you want to say, speak. And he brought up, it was almost like a film going in my mind. And all of a sudden, all the pictures of all of you guys started going through my mind. The McAfees and Jen Lewis and the Kazars and people that I had been doing life with for 15 years. And I just started to cry. And what the Lord said to me, this was one of those moments. This doesn't happen every time I sit down and say, God speak. But it was very, very clear. And I'm journaling. I'm writing this all down. It was very clear. He said, this mountain represents where you are. Isn't it beautiful? And the people who are there, isn't it beautiful? And I was like, yeah. I mean, it was just gorgeous. And I wasn't even able to see that because of the stuff going on inside of me. And he said, stay on the mountain. And I wrote all that down. And I went down and we met with the folks and I read my journal entry and there was more to it than that, and I'll unpack the rest of it later. But they basically said, well, you can go home now. And I came back and I didn't. I was going to tender my resignation, a month or two before that, and I didn't. And I didn't when I got back. But I was like, in the process, I'm like, Lord, I just don't have anything left. I don't have the resources to keep going. I'm that's just being honest, guys. And he said, just keep going. Just keep taking another step. It was about 2 or 3 weeks later, our lead pastor at the time, John Raz, who was my mentor and friend, was dealing with a health issue and took a very unforeseen turn for the worst and was unable to continue to lead. And I was asked to step in as interim lead pastor and then eventually as the lead pastor. But I would have been gone had I not listened to God. I would have had turned in my resignation and been gone. And then I was like, God, now I really don't have what I need. It was not what I was looking for. But you know what? It was once I got past what I had that I got to see God do what only God could do. And he will do this. That's what he did with the disciples here. And that's what he will do with you. You're going to have to get to the end of yourself sometimes and realize, I don't have what it takes, but God does. And that's where the good stuff happens. That's where the miracles happen. So keep moving, my friends. Keep going. Well, it says in verse 22, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray, and later that night, he was there alone. So we see Jesus, we see the value of prayer and connecting with God in Jesus' life, and this is not the only time he does this. Jesus made a practice of pulling away, connecting with God, getting a bigger picture of what's going on, and praying. And we need to do the same thing, because ultimately, when you realize you don't have what it takes, it's going to take your connection and your relationship with God to keep going, to see the breakthrough in your life. So Jesus goes up on the mountain, and I believe Jesus spoke mountain. He's always going up to high places to pray. I speak mountain, and I climbed a mountain. It's a language that I think Jesus and I share. But he goes up. He goes up on what scholars believe was Mount Arabel, which is on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. Here's a picture from Mount Arabel, and he gets the big view of what's going on. Now, you can see there in the picture, as he's looking north, he's very likely he would have been able to see, if it was a moonlit night, he would have been able to see the disciples in the boat, because the disciples, though they were in a storm, they weren't in a rainstorm. There weren't clouds everywhere. They were in a windstorm. There's a valley that comes up next to Mount Arabel, and the wind comes whipping out of there and onto the lake and stirs up all these white caps and big waves, and it's really scary. Has anybody ever been out in big waves and big wind on water? It's a scary thing. We used to go to, my in-laws used to live up on Seneca Lake in the Finger Lakes in New York, And we would go there for vacation every summer because it was free. Have I mentioned that I like free vacations? I like free vacations. So we would go up there, and they had a little sunfish, one-person sailboat. And so one day, Christy takes Josie out. Josie's about 6 years old, and they go out there, and they're sailing around and having fun. The wind's blowing, but it's not a windstorm. And then the gales pick up. And the white caps, like almost knocking the boat over. And it's scary when you're out there. They eventually go over, and Josie is yelling, and Christy's, struggling, and the boat's capsized, and they're in the middle of this lake. And Josie's like, Daddy would never let this happen. And she's right, I wouldn't have. But, and this is hysterical from a 6-year-old. She says, there's nothing left to do but despair. She's a little dramatic. Anyway, so we had to go out and get them in the motorboat, but it was scary, the boat's doing this, and the disciples are in this windstorm, but Jesus can see them. If it was a moonlit night, Jesus would have been able to see them from Mount Arabel. They're not that far away. It's not that big of a lake. He knows what's going on the whole time. So I think Jesus had them in the corner of his eye and could see what was going on. But I think Jesus would go to high places because when you go up to high places, it kind of elevates your perspective a little bit. You're able to look down. I think Jesus was probably looking down the timeline of history a little bit, looking at the cross and going, oh, that's going to be hard. And then looking past the cross to the people that he was going to lay his life down for, but it's going to be worth it. Maybe even looking 2,000 years ahead to us gathered here today going, it's going to be worth it. But he comes down off the mountain. He comes down off the mountain. Now the disciples are in that storm. The wind's blowing all around. All they can see are waves and white caps, and it's very, very crazy. Now we talked about storms a couple weeks ago. But storms are part of any adventure. Storms are part of any life. But they're certainly part of any adventure. And storms will test your bravery. The disciples were petrified. It's like, so when you set out on your brave, right, and a storm shows up, it's going to test your bravery. You'll probably have to rediscover your bravery in the middle of it. I have had to do that. And the disciples had to do that. And you will probably have to do that because storms will test your bravery. Some of us are in marriages right now where you're like, I don't know if I can take another step. I don't know that I can I don't see how this can end well. It's testing your bravery. You're going to find your bravery and go, you know what? I'm going to fight for this thing because it's worth it. Or some of us are in business situations where maybe you're being stabbed in the back by a partner, or you realize that the business model you've been working for the last 20 or 30 years is outdated and isn't going to work for the next 5, and you're going to have to retool, and you're looking at it going, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Are you going to find your brave and lean in, or are you going to stick your fingers in your ears and close your eyes and go, it's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening? Just so you know, this is not an effective strategy. But sometimes that feels easier to do than finding our brave. Storms will test your bravery. It's just part of the journey. Storms will also make you feel alone. The disciples were in the boat alone without Jesus for about 6 hours. The waves are crashing all around them. Jesus can see the whole thing. All they can see are the waves around them. They feel isolated and they feel alone. But if you're in a storm, and there are some of us in a storm right now and others of us that will be in a storm, if you're in a storm, you are not alone. That is a lie. It feels like you're alone, but you're not. The disciples are wondering where Jesus is. And Jesus lets them struggle in this windstorm for 6 hours. That's a long time. Is anybody not okay with that? Like, this is challenging for our Googleized culture where we want it in, 0.33 milliseconds. But Jesus allows them to struggle for 6 hours. And there's a lag time. But Jesus is doing something in the lag time. Jesus is doing something through that storm in them. He is strengthening their faith because as he comes through, he is softening their hearts. He is preparing them for what is coming next. And he's building their hope and their trust in him through the storm, oftentimes when we find ourselves in a lag time, we begin to question whether Jesus is still there, whether God is real. Like, everything's not easy. God, are you still there? Do you still love me? Anybody relate to that? Am I the only one? Listen to me. Don't lose heart in the lag time. Don't lose heart in the lag time. It's part of the process. Okay? God hasn't left you. This is normal. This is faith building. We can feel so alone, so out of control, even broken, and definitely afraid. But God is with us. You know, I went through a period of about 5 or 6 years, like, where everything just felt like a struggle. Anybody ever been there? Say yes. Maybe not for that long. 5 or 6 years where it was just like, if it could go wrong, it would go wrong. And if it could go right, it certainly wasn't going to go right. And I felt myself, despairing. Going, God, I thought I was one of your favorite kids. Like, come on, where are you? And it's easy. It's easy to lose heart in the lag time. But don't lose heart in the lag time. Jesus can see you, just like he could see them from Mount Arabel, he could see the whole thing. He knows how many hairs are on your head. And even if things aren't going your way right now, and it's not being fixed immediately, he's still with you. He still sees you. Don't mistake God's delay in the storm for abandonment. Don't mistake God's delay in the storm for abandonment. God is never, ever going to leave you. Even if it's hard right now, and even if it's been hard for a long time, you're not alone. One of the passages of Scripture that I hold on to and held on to in that season, but continue to hold on to this very day, is Joshua 1:9. If you want to memorize this Scripture, I'd encourage you to memorize this one. It says this: have I not commanded you, not suggested to you, but commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid and do not be discouraged. I think this is cool. It's not just don't be afraid, but we get discouraged, right? Especially in extended storms. Don't let your heart grow troubled. Don't let your heart grow discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. That's a promise. You're never alone. Even when everything isn't going your way, you're still not alone. Even when everything is going against you, God is still with you. Don't forget that. Your breakthrough is on its way, and God is already there with you in the midst of it. And usually it's by the time we recognize that he is with us, even in the midst of it, that he breaks through. Not always, but often. But here's what I do know. God shows up in the storm every time. Every time. There may be a lag time. There may be a longer lag time than you're comfortable with. There may be a lag time that makes you wonder, God, are you still there? Do you still love me? But he's doing something in you through it. He's preparing you for what's coming next. He's strengthening your faith, even though it feels like your faith is being weakened in the midst. Don't let it weaken your faith. He will show up. He always shows up. He's going to come through. He always does. He's been watching the whole time. He's with you the whole time. He comes through at just the right time, and he brings his power with him. See, Jesus sees you in the storm. You're never alone. He shows up in the storm, and he does a miracle for the disciples. He walks on water, enables Peter to walk on water. He calms the storm. He builds their faith. He strengthens their trust, and he prepares them for the next leg of the journey. And he does the same in your storm. See, there's a reason for storms. Jesus comes down off the mountain and he brings his power to bear in this situation. He comes down off the cross and he brings the power to bear in your situation. And he always comes through. Let me ask you this. Are you in a storm? Some of us are in a storm right now. And if you are you despairing? I hope you can hold on to this truth. He's with you the whole time. Some of us are sitting at the edge of our brave adventure, and we're like, well, there's a storm out there. I don't want to go. What if? What if? What if? And we're asking that question, and we're afraid to take the step. There's going to be a storm in your life either way, folks. The storm will come to you in your lazy boy, or you'll get up out of the proverbial lazy boy, and you'll go on the adventure, and you'll walk through a storm with a purpose. Storms without purpose are dreadful. But storms on an adventure full of purpose strengthen you and bring life. And guys, it's part of what you were made for. See, you were made to live an adventure. Jesus said he came to bring life in all of its fullness, and I believe wholeheartedly that part of that is he came to give you the courage to live beyond what you think you can live, to live an adventure. And there will be storms that are part of that, just like there will be storms if you just sit on the proverbial lazy boy. Now, I'm not against lazy boys. Let me just be clear about this. If you have one, enjoy your lazy boy chair, right? It's a metaphor. We worship comfort, we worship security. Are we willing to get off the chair and out onto the water? For some of us, this is your call. In the song Oceans, it says, he calls me out upon the water. Are you willing to get up out of the boat and go? Knowing there will be storms. Knowing that the miracle that you're looking for, knowing that the impact that you were created to have, knowing that the breakthrough in your life is on the other side of that storm. Are you willing to get up and go? Some of us need to do that today. There's some of us who need to start a business. Some of us who need to do that hobby. Maybe you need to ask her to marry you. I know it's scary. I was there myself. Maybe you need to adopt. Maybe you need to start a ministry. Maybe you need to heal your marriage. I don't know what it is for you. Whatever it is, what are you waiting for? Jesus can see you the whole time, and he's with you. And God will meet you in the middle of your action, not your inaction. God, when we move, guys, God moves, and he brings his miracles with him. And there will be storms, but he's with you in the storm, and he'll strengthen you in the storm. So don't despise the storm, and don't despise the lag time. Keep moving, because God steers moving feet. And God wants to direct your life, and he would rather you move and make a mistake than just sit in the lazy boy and wait for something to happen. So my call to you today, and I believe God's call on all of our lives, is come on. Come on. And just like Peter got out of the boat and walked on water, God has great things for you. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you that you came after us. I thank you that you love us. Jesus, I thank you that one of the most brave things that we could ever do is choose to follow you. And I pray for those who are considering that this day, that you would give them their brave. God, would you make us a people of action? God, would you guide our feet as we go? And Lord, would you encourage us as we go through the good times and through the struggles, that we would know your presence and your hand upon us. In Jesus' name, amen.